everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, whatever you are in the world now. We are very happy to have you here for another session of the Resident Philosopher's Talk. Today, dealing with a different topic and a very interesting one: how AI and neurotechnology are transforming the workplace. And for those who are joining us for the first time, my name is Anna, and I am the resident philosopher at the AI Collective. If you do not know yet what is the AI Collective, it's a global nonprofit community founded in San Francisco that brings together over 100,000 members worldwide amongst innovators, policymakers, scholars, and builders committed to fostering trust, openness, and the most important of all, human flourishing in the age of AI. And today we are continuing our new track of conversation that is called The Mind Under Control. As you know, this is an online conversation that we created together in a partnership with the Center for Neurotechnology and Law, which is an international research hub based in London, looking at how neurotechnologies intersect with law and human rights. And if you are curious to explore their work, you can check it out at neurotechlaw.com. I would also like to invite you to our next event. Our next event will be in May 6th, and it's titled Spirals of Connection. So we will be talking about AI spirals and intimate relationships between humans and machines. And we will have as a guest speaker Mickey Small, the founder of the relational think tank relate.org and also built2feelreal.com. You can register for this on Luma. So, today we will explore how AI technologies are reshaping the workplace, from promises of productivity to the reality of continuous cognitive monitoring and surveillance. And this is putting a challenge to fundamental ideas that we have, such as autonomy, privacy, and mental freedom. Today we have here with us two wonderful speakers, and I will introduce them also summarizing their CV and experience because they have brilliant experience in the field. And I will start by introducing Dr. Karen Herrera Ferra. She is a physician with a master's degree in clinical psychology, a PhD in bioethics, and a postdoctorate in neuroethics. She has extensive experience in clinical mental health and is an independent researcher, academic, and international advisor in bioethics and neuroethics. Dr. Herrera Ferra has represented Mexico in international neuroscience and neuroethics initiatives across Latin America, the United States, Europe, and Asia. She is the founder and former president of the Mexican Association for Neuroethics and has served in advisory roles for the Mexican Senate's Neuro Rights Group. And we also have here with us today Dr. Carlos Amunátegui Perreló. He is a tenured professor of law at the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile and holds a PhD in patrimonial law from Pompeu Fabra University. He is a leading scholar with over 150 scientific publications and 7 monographs on Roman law, civil law, legal theory, and the emerging technologies. Professor Amunátegui has been a visiting professor at Osaka University and Columbia University and played a key role in the constitutional reform that introduced neuro rights into the Chilean constitution and the corresponding legislation. So, in order to extract the most of these brilliant minds we have here with us today, I will give them 20 minutes for the presentation for each one, and then we will move to the Q&A afterwards, after they present their considerations on the topic. So please stay with us, and for the audience, in the meantime, I will be selecting questions from the chat. So you can post your questions there. They will be selected so that we can have the Q&A in a very interactive form with our speakers afterwards. And I would like to start with Dr. Carlos. Dr. Carlos, it's a pleasure to have you here with us today. Thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. Well, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you. Okay, so we're going to speak about neurotechnologies. Neurotechnologies is probably one of the most consequential technologies we have nowadays. It's it has kind of biblical proportions. It's like if AI is the problem of the present. It's nowadays the matter that it's being discussed everywhere. But neurotechnologies is really much more powerful, and it will be the subject in the next 10 to 15 years. We're in a very strange stage because it's a moment like the 1980s internet moment. I don't know if any of you were old enough to remember, but there was an internet in the 1980s. The thing is that very few people used it. Before the web, before the invention of the World Wide Web, internet was kind of a niche field. Then, after 1992, when the web was invented, suddenly it exploded into conscience, changed the way we behave, the way we interact, and of course, our economics and, and social relations. Well, neurotechnologies is even more powerful. And we are like in a 1980s moment of neurotechnologies. It can literally make the blind see, that's called retinal implant, make the deaf hear, cochlear implants, and make the paralytic walk, reconnecting the spine. It has been done. It was done 2024 in Austria. So it's quite a powerful thing. One thing that might interest you is that there is kind of an overlap between artificial intelligence and neurotechnologies. In fact, the very same 1943 paper of McCulloch and Pitts, the logical calculus of the relations of the of the ideas presented in the immanent in the nervous system, that very same paper, that was the first paper to mathematicize the brain activity, served as the basis for artificial intelligence and the construction of artificial neural networks. The whole idea of communicating artificial and natural neural networks comes shortly after from this kind of seed. The first attempts, as you probably well know, were made in the 1970s. Jacques Vidal's uh, studies in order to implant chips into monkeys' brains. But we have gone quite far from there. Nowadays, you got basically two different technologies, two ways to approach communicating the brain and an artificial neural network, a computer, basically. One of these is the invasive technologies, something that is represented now by or popularized by Neuralink. There are many other big players like BlackRock Neurotechnologies. Um, Recently, OpenAI opened their own firm on the matter with $850 million as capital. That's Merge Labs. And of course, we have Synchron, the big company from Australia. So that's into invasive neurotechnologies. They all intend to implant from one way or another electrodes in the cortical zone of the brain and get information from there to a computer, sometimes to the computer and back. Some of these technologies are not only able to read, but also to write. But since we are speaking about the workforce and the workplace, probably more interesting are the non-invasive technologies. The non-invasive approach is based basically on imaging, on imaging of the brain. How can you get images from the activity inside the brain? Basically, there are many techniques. Some of them are very efficient, but a bit big and uncomfortable for the workplace. Others are cheap, useful, but low resolution. So let's take a look at what we have. Well, the oldest imaging technology we have for the brain, it would be EEGs, electroencephalograms. Okay, these were invented, as you probably know, in the 1920s by Hans Berger. Basically, what they do is they put on your scalp electrodes. Many of you might have gone into that procedure. And the electrodes get, they get the signals from the brain from outside the scalp. So that's why it's not invasive. What can you see? The thing is that between the electrode and the brain, you got a skull, and that's quite thick. So you have a very low resolution idea of what's happening inside the brain. Basically, you just get kind of signals that are usually processed as waves, like alpha, beta, gamma, delta, eta. Those the first Greek letters were used to name them. So from this, the activity in the brain, we can get kind of an idea of what would be happening inside. So the problem is this is quite low resolution anyway, but still it can be very useful. For example, there's a nice toy. You can buy it in Amazon. It's the Star Wars Task Force, Science Force. It's kind of um, a headset. You put yourself the headset, and it's an EEG. And with that, you control a small environment. It's hologram, and you can, for example, take an X-wing outside of the Dagobah's swamp. If you are a Star Wars fan, you know what I'm talking about. The famous scene in Star Wars when Yoda asks Luke, "Use the Force to take you." Well, you can reproduce it. You can also fight with drones, fly an X-wing, and all that stuff just using mind. With the activities of your brain, you control the ship. It's interesting. Okay, this is kind of a fun thing to do. But of course, we have darker uses. For instance, in 2019 already, in some high schools in Shanghai, the technology was used to have an idea of the levels of concentration of students. So you had the teacher, in the teacher's desk, there was a board with lights. And these lights indicated the level of concentrations that the students were having. So if you were kind of distracted, then the teacher would know. I don't know about you, but that would have been hell for me. Okay, but this still in the educational side of things doesn't look that bad. But then again, you can know quite a lot if you have constant monitoring of the EEG of a person. You can know quite a lot about him. For instance, Apple has already filed for a patent and got it for EEG in the maybe next generation AirPods. So you will have When you listen to music or to anything in the web, you will not only have audio, but they'll be looking at your brain signals at that very moment. This is quite disquieting because they can know a lot about you with that. It's pretty low resolution, but they can see the spikes of interest when something interesting appears on screen. They can directly read, for example, your attention to certain things. They can know things like your political opinions, sexual preferences, and many other quite private things about you. What do you like? What do you hate? With a nice artificial intelligence, they can know about you even more than yourself. But this is kind of light. Is it used in the workforce? Well, it's starting to be used in the workforce. For instance, the mining company BHP is using it in some of their copper mining companies, in one of their copper mines. I don't know if you have ever seen a copper, this kind of big lorries that they use in copper mining. They are huge. So they're using these headsets in order to control the attention of the drivers. Sounds nice, sounds good because, well, at least if he falls asleep or is not concentrated, you might have an incredibly complex accident. But then again, there's some risk to this. Can the worker say no? Can he refuse to use one of these headsets? What happens with the data? Because this is a rather important thing. As you probably know, although brains are similar, each brain is unique. The morphology of every brain is different from every other brain. So, and in fact, everything, the brain changes constantly. Probably after this conference, your brain will change just a little, just to get the memory of it. So, the problem is each the data from every brain is unique and extremely valuable in order to predict the conduct of any given person. We haven't got yet big enough data sets in order to predict any conduct. The data now needs to be individual. So, what will happen with all that data recollected about yourself? Where will it go? How much control do you have over it? Well, usually in Europe, the answer would be, well, we've got the GDPR, so we're protected. No, you're not. I'm sorry to tell you, because the GDPR establishes the nature of the data considering the context of the way they get the data. So if you're using, if it's gotten in a medical context, yeah, it's sensible data, so it's sensitive data, so it's specially protected. But if it's gotten in the workplace or in a commercial feature or just playing a video game, is it still protected? It's not resolved. So this worries leads us to the Chilean constitutional reform the law that we and the bill that we are discussing now. In 2021, as an initiative that came from Rafael Yuste, the famous Spanish neuroscientist, the Chilean Senate started working on the problem of neuro rights. This sounds kind of advanced, doesn't it? Well, this is a particularity of Chile. One of the commissions of the Senate, the Commission of Future, works with scientists. The thing is, and scientists can put forward an initiative. And this commission is quite interesting for it because it helps the interaction between science and politics and makes it quite soft, quite interesting. So in this commission, the idea of legislation about neural rights emerged. Um, the constitutional reform, well, it was very worked. Finally, well, I intervened in it very heavily. Finally, we decided to include two things. One is the protection of the neural data. That's quite important because it was not present in the then Chilean law of data protection. Now it is. And the other thing that we included was a protection for the development of your conscience, a kind of liberty to develop your conscience and the neural relations that support it. It was kind of an important moment because for the first time, neural rights were being recognized in a constitution. Then we developed a bill. This bill is also quite interesting because we're not focused so much in therapeutical uses of neurotechnologies. We want therapeutical uses, we need them, and we think that they are properly regulated in our current legislation. We don't need to make it harder for doctors to apply their treatments. We already have legislated that. And we are not focused on research and development. Why? Because we already have legislation on the matter. So the regular legislation seems to be enough. The main focus of our legislation, of our initiative, is the matters that that do not belong either to research or to medical treatment. We could say commercial uses of neurotechnologies, labor uses of neurotechnology, educational uses, any other use. What are we sustaining? We think that these technologies should follow the same constraints and have the same status that they already have for medical uses. We want all neurotechnologies to be under a same regulatory umbrella. We think medical uses and research are well legislated. We need to extend this status, especially to commercial uses, in order to safeguard the privacy of the data and our neural independence. I think that's it for me. And I will leave you with someone much more interesting than me. That's Karen.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Carlos. Indeed, you left us with very interesting and intriguing questions. And before moving to Dr. Karen, I would just like to warm up a bit the conversation and take one of the questions that were addressed to you here on the chat. So the question is from Pia, and she's asking about how people would opt out of these technologies, aside from not buying them. But let's think about the work environment, for instance, how people could consent or refuse to consent if they need that job, if they work for a company. And this is a very complex question. I don't know if you saw, but 5 days ago, there was a news on the media saying that Meta is tracking the clicks on the mouse from their employees in order to train their AI systems. And at a
Mm.
certain point, we could even discuss the nature of this data, could be biometric in a certain sense, if we think that it can be a unique signal of, let's say, data produced by someone. But how people could act before those technologies, especially if we deal with the lack of proper consent in this case and people wanting to protect their cognitive freedom.
Okay, it's a brilliant question, really. Well, let's start with the problem of the first thing we have to start with is that using neurotechnologies should be part of your liberties. You are free to use them, but you cannot be forced to use them because freedom has two aspects: a positive freedom, a right to use them, and a negative freedom, and a right to refuse. The problem, of course, in workplaces is that it will probably not be mentioned, but will be a requisite. So the thing is that this is my belief, should be equivalent in a way, enforcing these kind of policies to make you use of neurotechnology should be considered a way of violence. Yeah. Should it be considered um, biometric data? Well, of course, in the European context, it would be very convenient to consider it a biometric data because then you get protection. Should it? Yes. Well, at least in Europe, it should, I think. But I think that the best approach is to have a separate category of sensible data that is just neural data. Because even if you could not consider it biometric, you should give that level of protection to it. I don't know.
Yeah, considering the effects that it can cause, especially in the workplace, that is a very unequal and asymmetric relationship between two different powers. Yeah. And well, just to echo a bit what Pia is saying here on the chat, I was thinking that perhaps this question will not be solved by individual consent. Perhaps there will have to be a work from unions and collectivity in general in order to stop or even prevent the use of those data by companies. So perhaps individual consent will not be possible and viable in any case, and people will have to reunite themselves in unions and other types of group or institutions in order to really negotiate that with an employer. And this will be a very challenging task, of course.
I would, I totally agree, but I would put a caveat to it. In not every country, unions are as powerful as they should be. In many countries, as my own, for instance, unions are quite weak. In the United States, also, they are quite weak. So, if you have a good union system, is the way to go. But in other countries, it might not be enough, I think.
Yes, to be seen. In any case, it was just a warm up. We go deep on the questions afterwards. Let's move to Dr. Karen Herrera Ferra. Dr. Karen, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'm gonna share my screen. Just hold on. Um, please let me know if all of you can see this. Is
Yeah, that works perfectly.
perfect. So I'm gonna talk a little bit of everything based on what Carlos' exposition, amazing exposition. So I'm just gonna talk a little bit of everything, right? And specifically, why or what are we concerned about? So I'm gonna give again a little bit of everything of information. So maybe you can answer yourself these two questions that was part of the of this event. So we need to really understand the scope of use of nanotechnology and AI, both benefits but also risks, because nanotechnology and AI are now applicable on every domain of human life. So it might have started from medicine, but now it is used in every single domain of human life. And therefore, we are required to know some fundamental concepts, again, to understand the scope of these of these technologies. Why? Because nanotechnology can evaluate and manipulate traits related to the brain and mind, such as emotions, thoughts, identity, empathy, free will, decision making, and behaviors. So these are traits related to the mind, but in some cultures, these are sacred traits. So this is not only manipulating pathology, behavioral pathologies. These are traits that makes ourselves who we are, unique as human persons. So we're going to start with the first concept or definition, which is neurotechnology. You will find a lot of definitions of neurotechnology, but I'm going to try to give you a one that is really wide, and I believe it embraces everything. It is a technology or even a procedure which directly or indirectly, either invasive or non-invasive, can evaluate, that means it can read, can access, it can get there, and manipulate or modify, that actually can do something there. Either the anatomy or physiology of any person or animal, or that processes data of the central and or peripheral nervous system, the mental and cerebral activity. Okay, so more concepts. Mental activity, which was part of the other of the neurotechnology concepts. So mental activity is mainly the development of cognition, emotions, and behavior. The brain activity is more about the electrical and chemical signals that will be a help response of behaviors, cognitive and sensory motor issues of the central system. The cognitive processes. What is a cognitive process? A cognitive process is a series of physical and chemical and electrical activities that will help our brain to interpret either internal or external stimuli. That means it helps us interpret either if I feel pain, how will I interpret that pain? Or how will I interpret any other external stimuli? So what I want you to know is that neurotechnology can read this and can manipulate all mental, brain, and cognitive activity. Now, neural data. What is neural data? It's any personal data, record or information that is derived from the anatomy or physiology of both nervous systems, that is the central or peripheral, and from the mental and brain activity. And I'm going to talk a little just the definition of neural rights. There are many academics, many scholars that are not that believe that neural rights are not needed because they think that the current human rights will protect everything that we are concerned about because it's very specific. So, what is neural rights? They are human rights and principles aimed at safeguarding the dignity of individuals in relation to the anatomy or physiology of the central and peripheral nervous systems, their mental and brain activity, and the information derived from them. So, if you see, for example, if there is no specific current human right that will protect you from consciousness or your empathy. So this is a very debatable topic that we're still, currently and trying to make sure that everybody understands the scope of everything and knows these key concepts that we all really need to know and understand so we can have um, a more explicit dialogue and like bringing together all the positions so we can get in a consensus that actually will protect human right and dignity. And neuroethics, it's a discipline that will study cognitive processes related to the traits that I was telling you about of the mind that are very unique and in some cultures are even sacred, such as identity, consciousness, free will, empathy, emotions, thoughts, behavior, decision making, even moral decision making. And it does have a lot of implications and concerns, including the medical, ethical, legal, philosophical, social, cultural, human rights, political, economic, public safety and military concerns. So if you see, there's a lot of human domains that are actually impact have an impact because of this new technology and also AI. So as you see, what we are maybe a lot or mainly concerned is about the neural data, because there is not only information of the nervous system, it's information of the mind, and it's information of the person, that it's information that can be read, it can be manipulated, but also it can be replicated in the form of AI. So I just want to show you a little bit what is a situation where all many of the cognitive processes are involved. So I know that many of you know about this train moral dilemma. So we have this train that has no brakes and will absolutely just go to really literally kill these five people who are not aware of what's going on. And then we have this other trail with one person that is also not aware of what's happening. So if I ask you, what should we do with this train? Because someone will die and you have to choose. And then maybe we'll say, well, it's I mean it's a dilemma, right? Because when it's a dilemma, it's because all your options are tough or even morally impossible. So we just need to choose. And of course, uh, killing five people instead of one seems like the least horrible situation, right? Or option. So then I will ask you, okay, just take your cell phone and please just press your the key, the X key. As soon as you press that key, then the train will go to this person. So now you have the responsibility of choosing who you are going to kill. Okay? So please press the X key. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. This person is your father or your son or your partner. Okay, so then you might not choose to kill this person. So if you notice, I was escalating the questions, and the only thing that I added was emotions. That's it, emotions. And you can see how your moral decision making changed. Now, when it's decided that one person should die instead of five, it is called the utilitarian perspective, the better for everyone. If you decide to kill this five instead of this one, it is called the humanitarian posture. So, humans, we are able to make this tough decision. AI, on the other hand, you see it's the automatic cars. They are programmed to choose between the lesser object to impact, in this case, the baby, because the algorithm are they were programmed to protect everybody in the car, right? So they won't be able, or they are not able to have this tough, immediate moral decisions. So what if I say that this old lady is heading for her appointment for euthanasia, right? So anyways, this car is going to kill the baby. So even though we have this information about the euthanasia, the car is not programmed to take this tough moral decision making. And as I said, the moral decision making has a lot of cognitive processes. Okay, so we can see it might be AI might replicate a lot of human traits, but still will not make the moral decisions that maybe we need in some situations. So what has happened with AI? So humans have been using AI for a long, long time. So this is a one-way specific interaction. Now, there is no neurotech without AI. So neurotech reads and then sets the data to AI. AI interprets, decides, and then gives feedback to the neurotechnology to dictate what part of the brain or how should be stimulated or inhibited, so that actually in the closed loop neurotechnology, AI will start taking decisions for us. Now, now, there is not only a humans AI interaction, there is humans interacting with AI, is ChatGPT, and AI will interact with humans, learning AI, our expectations, our patterns of behavior, how fast we respond, our emotions, and it will be fitting, this fitting to learn, because that's what generative AI does. It learns. Now, we have a little complication here, which is a four-way continuous interaction. So we have humans interacting with AI and AI interacting with humans. This specific relation, it is a little bit complicated because AI is programmed to be condescending, friendly service, and accommodates someone's taste and will. It is satisfying and immediate emotional responsive through this feedback of human interaction. In sum, this AI will learn to fulfill your specific expectations. This relationship does not need any kind of negotiation or empathy nor compassion. Okay, so this is a complicated and different relation from human to human. So let's say that this person that is now used to be immediately satisfied, non contradicted, and start having a relationship with another human that has the same, or a human that is not having this AI relationship. What will happen? The expectations will change. I will be expecting for any of you to be condescending, friendly, and to fulfill all my expectations immediately. This will have huge impact on how we know now the social relationships. Now, as we can see, we do need to protect. What do we need to protect? Do we need to protect the nervous system? Do we need to protect the mind? Or do we need to protect the person? So we need to protect everything through ethics and human rights. So with this, I want to tell you that we think that any regulation or any intent to protect the nervous system, the person, the mind, is or should be under a framework of high ethical and human rights standards, such as dignity, transparency, integrity, confidentiality, non discrimination, equity, reliability, responsiveness, accountability, privacy, protecting identity, autonomy, to be safe, and to be culturally and contextually consistent. So as Carlos was saying, maybe, in some countries there is not the same, it wouldn't work the same any or a specific legislation. So a year and a half ago, in July 2024, we did worked and wrote a general law on rights and neurotechnologies bill. Currently, this bill is still on the Senate, and it has an impact. It's a 200-page bill. It has an impact on the whole Mexican legal ecosystem, but I'm focusing mainly on work today because this is the topic that we are concerned today. So we in some we have this we thought that the protection of workers will be, like, more reasonable if it was mandated, um, to have ethical use of policies, a voluntary informed consent, that I will talk a little bit about this one later, non-discrimination based on neural data, because it's not as if we're going to allow to have neural data, because we're kind of too late for that, but it has to be really a non-discrimination based on neural data. It has to be a legitimate purpose for data collection, data confidentiality, and a prohibition of invasive monitoring. So as Carlos was saying, it is invasive and non-invasive, and in work, it's the non-invasive one. And to have workers training on the ethical use of technology. Also, we need to talk about cybersecurity. So that way we make sure that at least it gives another layer of protection to workers. And then there are decisions regarding hiring, promotion, and dismissal based on neural data that must be fair, transparent, and based on objective criteria. So we do know that there are specific criteria, not neural data, but specific criteria for hiring, for promotion, and dismissal, but it has to be based on, it has to be fair, transparent, and based on objective criteria. And we think that if neural data is included, it has to like the same process. Now, on regards the informed consent, it has to be voluntary, revocable, and express consent. It has to be renewable. And here is like the important part. It has to be included the knowns and unknowns. We do have a lot of unknowns, right? So we have to make sure that the informed consent says it will be safe on this, but we have no idea what will happen with this in short, medium, and long-term effect. And it is mandated to foster social participation and include social concerns. So this is the part of a very summary of the bill that we work on regards the work domain. Therefore, all forms of AI and neurotechnology are really invaluable and promising tools for human development and flourishing as well as benefit. But we know history. We like to explore. And unfortunately, we like to cross limits. And we not need to be really aware that technology fails. I mean, it doesn't matter how secure or marvelous. We know it fails. How are we going to cope with it? We need to make sure not to do the overvalue, the novelty, the hype, and we need to make sure we are not minimizing or neutralizing risk, resulting in poor protections of users and their data. Of course, human rights and ethics, and specific concerns for underrepresented populations. The majority of AI and our technology are developed in the global north, and the global north represents 32% of the global population. So underrepresented populations, we're talking about more than 60% of the global population that it is not included on how AI and our technology is designed, developed, and used. Therefore, we must be respectful of human rights and ethics to ensure a healthy and safe future for humanity. Of course, this is a work in progress, and we need to address this as a work in progress that should be interdisciplinary, inclusive, and truly international. Again, just not being only the 32% of the global population. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Dr. Karen. Amazing presentation. Well, I think we have many questions for you. And I would like to start with one question that perhaps is also echoing in others people's minds here today. That is the question around the definition of neurodata or mind data. So here in Europe, we have very interesting work that was developed by the UNESCO on guidelines regarding neurodata. And one of the things that I wonder when I read this work is when it comes to the concept of neurodata, because generally it's defined in a way that encompasses only brain data or data that is coming from the nervous system. But if we think about it, there has to be something more encompassing the mind, because we can, of course, capture the data coming from the brain signals, as you and Dr. Carlos mentioned. So, for instance, we have technologies such as fMRI and electroencephalography. But my question here is there something more to the brain, meaning the mind, an aspect that perhaps those machines cannot really capture, and that is there as well and should be protected, like something more abstract and perhaps something more subjective as well, encompassing the moral values and the principles that this person is assigning to during their lives, or emotions, for instance. And if this is also encompassed in the definition of neurodata or neuro or data coming from the mind, I would like you to also clarify what is the mind then, because I don't know if we have a general definition and consensus on this. So, how can we have these new rights consecrated in constitutions, such as the Chilean one, if there is a lack of a big perception around the definition of it? So, how do we take on these challenges?
Okay, those are great questions. Okay, so when we develop the definition for neural data for this bill, um, we are really aware of all like the philosophical implications of like look, neurotechnology is giving a lot of information for neuroscience, information that we thought was only philosophical or maybe even part of the spirit, right? So something very subjective, so like the transcendence of the human that is not objective. Having all this information has granted us, and it's really undeniable and it's really strong, that there is a biological basis for all this, what we thought it was, untangible. So we decided, because everything is evolving so fast, that any information of the anatomy or how it works, the brain, that is the physiology, and all the data. So we try to encompass this as the more objective way that doesn't need to have a lot of philosophical discussions, and it will include everything. Because if I say, yeah, we do have fMRIs, and they say, oh, the brain in love, the brain, you know, it's not the brain in love. It's the brain, it's a person who is feeling love and what parts of the brain are activated or inhibited. That's it. You can't read emotions. You can read states, like he is feeling sad, or but he's not, like, So there is the huge ethical issue about what we see, who sees that information in the MRI, and who is interpreting that, and what are you looking for? So if I have an fMRI, and then let's say an internal a physician is going to interpret it, or it's going to be different, that neuroradiologist that is has more experience will interpret that. And it's different if I'm looking for a brain tumor, that if I'm looking for whatever it gives us a sign that we might be having a biological basis for empathy, identity, emotions. So we're not saying that we are neuroreductionists or we are only brain. No, we are saying that nowadays, the last 10, 20 years, we have a strong evidence that there is a biological basis of what we thought was the mind. What is the mind? Currently, the mind, like more in this biological basis trend, is the expression of the brain. So, but we cannot say, I can read your mind. So I can identify some areas of the brain that are part responsible on generating behaviors, emotions, thoughts. So we need to be very careful how we manage our narrative on regards the findings of neuroscience. So if we are not sure, because we are not sure about a lot of things of the mind, brain, and human person, then let's focus on what we can see and we know, which is anatomy and physiology. And as the technology will evolve and will be more specific, we might find more traits about the mind, but only the biological basis. And we have to make sure that we are seeing a brain in a body, and this body is interacting in a specific ecosystem. And as Carlos said, it's if you have seen one brain, you have just seen one brain. We cannot generalize that, you know. And I don't know if that answers your question because then I speak a
It
lot.
does. It does. And just before moving with Dr. Carlos, because I think that he also wants to comment on this, just to confirm, when you say that the mind is the expression of the brain, you mean brain waves and signals that we can collect through EEG, which are electrical, or fMRI, which are the areas activated in the cognition. So
Both, because
basically, it's
we're talking
very like
about,
imagery, like it's something that we see in an image.
yes. So if you are seeing something in an image, that's a substrate. That's anatomy. If you, so we have the brain with a specific area, and there are the chemical processes, electrical processes, and then that's the way we see how it works. So we know it works with electricity, with chemicals. So, and that's the physiology. Okay, so the brain activity is more like the substrate, and the mental activity is more like the EEG and stuff that we can measure by activity that we know it's living. The movement of oxygen, the movement of glucose. That's what we tag as activity. So you can have the frontal lobe image, but to make sure that it's actually working, you need to measure the physiology. EEG, again, glucose, oxygen, and that's that's different.
Okay, that
Okay,
answers the question.
okay,
Interesting.
great.
Dr. Carlos, please go ahead. I know you wanna say something.
Okay, well, that's kind of a very big question. What's the problem about this? The problem is that, okay, first things first, the UNESCO guiding principles are an excellent initiative, and the UNESCO is about one of the most respected world organizations to give this kind of advice. In fact, they've done it in with artificial intelligence, and this, in fact, this the UNESCO principles I think were redacted by Roberto Andorno, which is one of the creators of the neuro rights movement. So it's a very good piece of work. Now, neurodata. Neurodata is basically any data that you can get about the functioning of your nervous system. And it's important to mention that it's not just the brain, because your nervous system extends through all your body. All your body is full of neurons. You can, in fact, you feel, you touch, you taste, any sense you have, it's because you got neurons there, capturing the particularities of your environment. And this leads us to your main question, the mind. The mind is basically a subjective problem. There is it's a very difficult thing to make some kind of science of the mind. Why? Because, well, the mind, it belongs to a different world, belongs to the world of consciousness. And the problem is, we do not know exactly what consciousness is. We know, as Karen said, that there is a relation, a connection between your neural states and your consciousness or your mind. But how this matches, how this relationship is constructed, that's not clear at all. You get maybe the most interesting work on the matter was made by Francis Crick. You know, he was one of the discoverers of DNA. He dedicated the last years of his life to studying the brain and consciousness in particular. Francis Crick has a book called The Astonishing Hypothesis. His hypothesis is that everything that the mind is comes basically from neurons. There are other ideas about it. You got, for example, the integrated information theory. It's quite popular in some circles, but it leads a bit like to pantheism. Well, it's a very complex problem. We don't know. What did we do when we discussed this problem in Congress? Well, you know, the senators and deputies in the deputies chamber, they started having this conversation about the relationship between the brain and the mind, and said, okay, we're not going into that. Why? Because we don't know, and it's always a philosophical question. We're just going to protect the neural substrate. The mind that emerges from that, it's a different problem, it's a different solution, I think. All that.
That's an interesting answer, and I totally agree. If we stop to wait until we have all those definitions fully resolved, we will never have any regulation or practical means of governing society and technology. So I totally agree that we should anticipate ourselves in this sense. A very good answer. There are more questions here on the chat, and let me take a question from Ishan Vadua. So the question is, could you please tell me what are the parameters that set user behavioral data and neural data apart? And given the objective, how the governance aspect should be approached?
I'm sorry, I was looking for the icon. I'm sorry. Well, it's the narrow. I don't think that behavior is apart from neural data. Again, if we are talking only about the biological basis, okay. Remember, we are not talking about what we can see, and we are sure that we are not only brain. Okay, so. Uh, you can evaluate, for example, if I ask you, if we are in an fMRI, and if I ask you, could you please grab the book in front of you, so then your brain will start to activate the group of neurons that will actually make your arm to just move. So we know again that there is a genesis or origin of the behavior starts on the brain, part of it, when partially possible related areas of the brain. Just make sure that we are not saying that we are neurons. We are not. But why we're talking about this? Because the latest evidence or neuroscientific evidence does confirms that part of our behavior, our thoughts, and our emotions are have a biological base. So just I don't know if I and can you repeat me, like it was a two-part question, or
No,
was that
it was a, yeah, and
okay?
afterwards he said something on regulation, right? Or governance, yes. But I would like to jump to another question. There was something that was not mentioned here today in your talks, but it's something curious. The case around the company called Emotiv in the US, right? And I think that they also tried to implant their technologies or business in Chile, and it was not successful there. Dr. Carlos, I think you have dealt with this at a certain level. I don't know. Could you just mention to us how was a bit of this case and what this company was doing in practice? Well, I can anticipate that they were developing technologies to be used at the workplace. And in Chile, at least, it did not work, right?
Okay, it's a very interesting case because it's the first case, the first world case, where no rights came into a courtroom. So it was kind of interesting. What happened? You had a motive company. They basically make headsets and they promote them for different uses: meditation, measuring different stuff, of course workplace uses also. But well, the thing is that uh, Girardi, the case was Girardi versus Emotiv. Girardi, which was a senator in Chile and one of the promoters of revelation on neuro rights, bought one of these headsets and installed it and started using it. Then he wanted to erase his data from Emotiv's database, and Emotiv simply said, no, we're not going to erase it. So he made, how you call it? It's a constitutional action. He planted a constitutional action against Emotiv in order to have a pronouncement of the courts. And the Supreme Court the decided several different interesting things. First, that neural data was specially protected, even if it was not obtained in a medical environment, it was still specially protected and should therefore be raised as if the person asked for it. Secondly, that there was no clear consent to the usage of neural data because he had not been informed of its storage and security, etc. And third, that no, and this is interesting because the Supreme Court kind of made a is kind of using the same criteria that are in the bill, but the bill has not been promulgated yet. Well, anyway, said that these devices should follow an approval of the Instituto de Salud Pública, that is something like an FDA in the United States, as our agency that provides authorization for medical devices. Although it was not a medical device, it should follow the same procedure. So it was quite interesting. That's about the case.
Yeah, and quite interesting the decision of the Supreme Court in order to recognize those rights, even if they are not collected in a medical setting. So it's very important and advanced in that sense. Well, another question here from Sarika to Dr. Karen, I think. Yes. So the question is, if in the future we have a 4-day work week, would we use the neurotech to see if on the fifth day men are picking up the emotional labor of women? Essentially, can we measure neuro-emotional safety, division of labor, and fulfillment of gender equalizing behaviors in men and women? Okay, I'm not sure if I got your question correct, Sarika, and if you want to clarify, I will open the mic soon, but maybe I think the question is about if we can measure differences of gender in the way that we have those neuro or mind data collected. Not super sure. Let's see if the
It's a very yeah, I don't know how. Well, if that's the case, I mean, if that's the question, I will say that yes, yes, yes. There's a difference. There is a difference in the brain of the woman and in the brain of the man. Absolutely, there is difference, and you can absolutely measure that. And it is neuroscientific proof that our brains absolutely function different um, in emotions. And yes, yes, there is. They can evaluate that. Yes, they can. Yes, they
okay.
can.
So another interesting question, since we were mentioning political scenario and the Supreme Court in Chile. So it's a question for you both. From your work, how would you gauge the state of AR awareness among the politicians and colleagues you are interacting with? Do you feel like more people seem accurately informed or misinformed about the roles and goals of AI platforms?
Well, okay. Raise their awareness. That's a very big, trouble problem. Well, nowadays, some years ago, I don't know, 5 years ago, being the awareness about AI and its possibilities was quite low. Basically, if you started talking about AI regulation, you were looked at as okay, so you are some kind of weirdo. But nowadays, it is a problem that it's almost impossible to evade. You can't open the newspaper without seeing some kind of AI news. So it's a very big topic. I was basically we are in Chile. We are discussing AI regulation now in the Senate. I was in the Senate on Friday on the matter. So it's a big subject. I think people have become more than aware. But the problem is that many times the what people mean when we say regulating AI is very different things. Usually, for example, when the message comes from the companies, from tech industry, tech industry wants a regulation, but a regulation that minimizes the opportunities of smaller companies to compete with them. So, usually, governments want also a regulation, but they're many times worried about the values that the artificial intelligence have. For example, Chinese regulations makes the values of the Chinese artificial intelligence align with the communist values of the party. We see that same movement in the last winning the race document of the Trump administration. Once alignment with the American values, that's the way it tells it, American values, and especially forbids the using of restraints considering gender equality, diversity, and stuff like that. It's on black and white. It's on the document. So we see a problem of values. And what we want, the people, what we want when we talk about regulation is basically protection from misaligned AIs. So now we have We all want regulation, but what kind of regulation are we getting?
Yeah, I agree with Carlos, and I think that yeah, of course, more people is aware about AI, but I think again that this is an overvalue, a lot of promises, a lot of enhancement, more than, for example, treatment in medicine or only a tool. So I don't think people is actually perceiving AI as a tool for us, but more than do stuff for us. And there is a lot of proof, neuroscience proof that if you use a lot of chat GPT, for example, your critical thinking is shrinking. So there is a difference of any with any other technology where you just it's a bridge between what I for doing something. So I want you to delete this, but AI can actually be again make decisions for us. That's different. That's a huge different technology. We haven't had technology that makes decisions for us. So people, I think, is more like, what can do what? How can I live my life doing less? And you know, having this machine thinking and making decisions for me. I think that's the risk, and I think that even though people are looking this as a hype and as a super resource, there isn't. That isn't because they are minimizing any potential risk. And now, to understand the risk, as you see with our expositions, there's a lot that you need to know. And I don't think people have this information as specific, as deep, as profound as it's needed to be to make decisions regarding AI. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this answer. It's also a matter of making science more democratized and popular to people, and this is at the basis of the conversation. In any case, let's wrap up, but before that, I would like to invite the audience to use the mic and participate with their beautiful voices. So now you can just click on the button, ask a question there, and ask a question directly to our speakers. So you can see that the button is enabled, so you can click on it and form a queue. And I hope that there will be at least one person to ask a question live or to make a comment. Also, you can comment on things, so don't be shy. Let's see if someone comes up. There is a okay, people are there. So Lisa Revelli, hello Lisa, how are you?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so I am a product designer who has an interest in developing tools or support for neurodiverse adolescents. And just building this, I realized AI is in its infancy stage because the engineers I work with are young. And I realized that getting getting guidance or from your guest speakers is so important because basically someone like me, I think is a novice, is guiding these engineers to build something that I need a lot more support. So how does one who is a product designer and has a business get support from someone like your guest speakers?
Okay, you can write me an email
Okay.
or get in touch with through LinkedIn or to Karim maybe.
Okay, because there are two NSF grant opportunities. Oh, one I'm going for, and another one with EdSafe AI that's creating principles and frameworks to present to the government. on AI and what should be included. So I would love to connect with both of you because I need help. It's a big thing.
That's great. And also, there was someone, I don't know if it was you, Lisa, who asked if the slides will be available for people who attended the session today.
Yes, that was me.
Dr. Karen, could we share the slides with the people here?
Of course, should I send that to you, Anna?
Yes, and then I
Yes.
can share afterwards
Yes.
with the
Okay,
recording.
because I don't know how to share it in the chat. I'm sorry. Yeah, but
Okay.
I will send it to you. Yes, of
Thank
course.
you.
Thank
Because
you. Thank you for the interest.
in writing these grant proposals, I need to learn the terminology, the vocabulary. And I found those slides very just will just help me tremendously. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. And I will share the link because these are all in the bill of the, the, the bill that they wrote. And we also publish the part of mental health in the Lancet Psychiatry. So I'm gonna send that to Anna also, so you can have. I mean, it's in Spanish. The all the terminology of the bill, but in the Lancet is in English. So I hope that helps. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. So now we have here with us Sarika. Yes, Sarika, please go ahead.
Hi, yes, I kind of just want to dovetail off my question from before about
Thank you for this.
gender equalizing use cases of neurotech. The previous question was about measuring how, if we had a 4-day work week, are we encouraging the division of labor in a household? Is it within the purview of a workplace to measure or have some say about the household? You know, if she's a stay-at-home wife, is it that she's got, you know, her mental state is suffering while he's just sitting at a desk, like all powerful? You know, is this a future framework we can have in the developed world, to use our technologies like this? Can we, and thereby reduce things like financial coercive control, and thereby reduce things like women's mental health issues? Can we really measure emotional wellness in that regard as it pertains to the balance of labor? That's my question.
Yes, yes, we can measure that. Yes, I mean the possibility of doing that is adjust the way how business or employers will use it. That's a different story. Or how again how people or how this neural data is going to be used. Is it going to be used to discriminate? Is it going to be used to being more, give accessibility or for a woman that is working and they are working and having a child and they are, yeah, that's possible. It's possible. I don't know if it will improve gender equity or if it's going to widen the gap. That depends completely on the humankind, and we know usually not as morally as we should be.
I mean, I hope so. We've made so many strides in access to financial services, access to women's rights in developing countries before we start saying, let's export it to Africa. You know, we can't do that. I do not support that. So I hope that we can get that line. It's not just like, is a workplace measuring whether or not I'm taking a nap in the middle of the day and am I a good worker or a bad worker as I show up, but like, you know, how am I treating my wife and daughter?
Yeah, thank you very much for this comment and question, Sarika. Very important to touch on these gender issues as well. And yeah, there has to be a way to use technology for the social good and for these matters as well. So if we can measure, for instance, um, let's say indicators of mental health in women and how gender inequalities are contributing to greater or lesser levels of mental health. Of course, we can use technology to also benefit from this and balance this situation. So, yeah, this is a very good idea for people in the audience, especially the developers, in order to work with this type of technologies. What could we measure, and how could we improve, and yeah, bring more balance to these asymmetric relationships that we have nowadays. Thank you
Yeah, I
very
just
much.
yeah, I just like just as a closing, it's I think Jordan Peterson said that like sometimes the patriarchy puts too much pressure on men. Can we shift that balance? And like, maybe the divorce rates would drop if we were able to balance these things. Maybe suicidal tendencies in children would drop if we were able to like make happier mothers. Maybe if you're a stay-at-home mom, the company should pay the mom directly so it doesn't have to go through a husband, or vice versa if it's a woman that's working. Just an idea. Thank you for your response.
Thank you very much. So, with this very thoughtful comment, we are going to conclude, and I would like to give just 1 minute for each of you, Dr. Kari and Dr. Carlos, to conclude and bring your closing remarks. And then we are going to wrap up the session. Thank you.
Okay, well, just a small thing. This is a very important technology. It's probably one of the most powerful things that we have ever invented. And the interface between artificial intelligence and neurotechnologies will probably make the world impossible to recognize just in 15 years' time. So let's prepare ourselves, because definitely, if we have a nice regulation in place, maybe this time we'll have a better chance at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. Yeah, well, I just think that again, I mean, this technology is overwhelming, and it is expanding, and it is escalating faster than we can understand it. So I think that we should be humble enough to understand that it cannot replace who we are or how we think, and that governance is absolutely urgent, necessary. And we need to focus on that. We need to protect our children. We need to understand that the babies are, in this the last year, they will never know a world without AI. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hoping to see you guys in our next session. Bye bye. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, our wonderful speakers. Thank you very much. Bye bye.